Good morning. It is me, Dr. Coach Sir Orlando Rivera, and today I'm going to be talking about the conventional versus the trap bar deadlift for sprint performance. Basically, I'm going to be highlighting why I think the trap bar is complete shit. No, I'm just kidding. There's clear merit to utilizing both, as you will see in a brief moment. All right. The first thing that I want to highlight is what I believe to be the current view or perspective that a lot of individuals and strength and conditioning coaches view for these two different modalities. So, in my opinion, it has really shifted towards kind of the trap bar for sports performance being kind of that angel or beloved lift, and then the conventional deadlift looks more like the devil, where what a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, and I've had many athletes come up to me and tell me, my coach tells me it's really not worth the risk because really it really increases the chance of injury. So why have strength and conditioning coaches and individuals gravitated towards the trap bar? Well, it really boils down to the subtle difference between the trap bar and the conventional deadlift. For the trap bar deadlift, an individual stands within the trap bar, and if they're standing somewhere near the center, the load is dispersed evenly across their center of mass. Now, on a conventional deadlift, the barbell is placed in front of the individual, and while this doesn't seem like a big difference, it does create a biomechanical difference, and it creates what we call a longer moment arm that increases the load on the deadlift. Now, they're not exactly wrong in that conventional deadlifting does seem to be a very common injury site. Looking at powerlifters and weightlifters, Asa et al. Found that yes, the shoulder, low back, and knee were commonly injured, but specifically, one study within this systematic review found that 50% of injuries occurred to the lower back. Beyond that, Winwood et al. Looked at strongman athletes. While I don't know if they looked at conventional versus trap bar, I don't really know of many strongman athletes that are doing trap bar deadlifts, so we can really safely assume that of these 24% of injuries to the lower back, right, a decent percentage of them are probably related to the conventional deadlift, right? So, looking at, well, really what's driving this injury, right? So the conventional deadlift has greater loads on the erector spinae. The erector spinae are pictured here on the left. This is at least one of your three erector spinae muscles, your longissimus thoracis. This is specifically what this study looked at. Now, in my opinion, yes, the conventional deadlift increases load on your erector spinae. In my opinion, if you have decent to good technique, this is probably a good thing, because what it does is it, just like any other muscle, trains this muscle and will help this muscle A, increase in strength, and B, grow. What I have seen through experience is that some do lack the motor control to perform the hip hinge pattern. Now, it's not everybody, but when you're teaching a deadlift pattern, some don't have the proper motor control, definitely initially when you're teaching it, right? Some might look like this. My guy Lyndon, right? The other day we were deadlifting in the weight room, and I've taught him technique. I showed everyone proper technique. I turned around and I saw him deadlifting like this. All I had to do was give him about 3 minutes, 3 minutes of instruction, and 3 minutes later, he looked like this. All right, now ignore the excessive cervical extension, which is whatever. Some people feel that's probably not the best technique, but if you could look at his lower back, right, that's a massive difference, okay, from there to there, right, and that's with 3 minutes of instruction. So again, I think some lack the motor control, so you need to teach them. Because if you lack the motor control, this leads to poor spinal mechanics, and it does put your spine in a relatively poor position, increasing the load, right, on the spine, and specifically increasing load at the front of your intervertebral discs, right? If you do have continuous loading with poor mechanics, this will lead to injury, right? And in my opinion, right, again, some of this is my opinion, some of this is research. In my opinion, some coaches are just lazy, right? They're going to just, and I get it, right? If you're going to be with large groups of individuals and you can't control every single aspect, yeah, maybe you want to use the trap bar, right? But to say that the conventional deadlift is terrible, it's not worth the risk, no, I just think you need to pay closer attention to technique, be extremely diligent with technique, and then properly build in progressions on a conventional deadlift. Does it have to be a conventional deadlift? No, I haven't really touched on that. It could be a different type of hinge pattern. But in my opinion, I think a lot can benefit from really just paying a lot of attention to proper loading progressions and proper motor patterns. Okay, so at this point, you can see that there is a higher chance of injury that might be related to the conventional deadlift with special regards to the lower back. So the question is, why even bother? Why bother teaching the conventional deadlift if there's this potentially slightly higher chance of injury? And the benefit from teaching the conventional deadlift and performing the conventional deadlift really lies in that they're completely different lifts. So what you can see here is some data from Camara et al. And what you see on the left, you can see the conventional deadlift. On the right, you can see the data from the trap bar deadlift. This represents muscle activation via EMG for each of the lifts at 3 different sites: the vastus lateralis, or the quadriceps in the front of the leg, the biceps femoris, the back of the leg, one of the hamstring muscles, and we already touched on the erector spinae, right, your upper and lower back. Now, one thing that isn't really highlighted is you can see that there is a clear difference in the vastus lateralis activation during both the concentric and eccentric portion, and the trap bar deadlift has higher activation of the quadriceps for both the concentric and eccentric portion. So in my opinion, this starts to look a little bit more like a squat, right? Now, I specifically highlighted the biceps femoris. So let's talk a little bit about the biceps femoris. One of the most common injuries in both sprinting and team sports is the hamstring muscles. Of the hamstring muscles, the biceps femoris is the more commonly injured hamstring muscle. So what you can see here is there is higher EMG activity of the biceps femoris in a conventional deadlift. So kind of extrapolating this out, my thought would be, hey, there's a chance that by training the biceps femoris via the conventional deadlift, we can help mitigate the chance of injury in sprinting. So that's kind of my big rationale for why I am going to continue to use the conventional deadlift. I think there's other strong merit to using the conventional deadlift. Just teaching a proper hip hinge pattern that really is important for life. And then for sports performance, the other big one for me is if you are of the mindset that any type of weightlifting like the clean or the snatch is important for sprint performance, well, there's going to be a far greater transfer of training to the clean by doing a conventional deadlift than there would be the trap bar deadlift. So there it is. I mean, I'm not saying that the trap bar is complete shit, because there is merit to using the trap bar, right? The trap bar is not useless. So this is more data from the Camara et al. Study, and this now looks at some kinetic variables of the trap bar versus the conventional. So once again, you've got the trap bar on the right, you've got the conventional here on the left, and really what we're looking at is forces, right? So we've got peak ground reaction forces, peak power, and peak velocity. And you can see that the trap bar for our forces outperforms the conventional deadlift in every single category. Right, what this basically means is we're going to get higher power at the same relative loads. We're going to move the barbell faster at the same relative loads. So we're going to essentially extend at the knee joint, extend at the hip joint significantly faster than using a conventional deadlift. And in my opinion, this matters to a great degree for sprint performance. So to wrap this up, how are we going to implement both the conventional and the trap bar deadlift? So the way we're going to do this is essentially early season, we're going to spend some time teaching the conventional deadlift, right? Because that requires more diligent work with regards to motor patterning. So we're going to teach that motor pattern of the conventional deadlift. I'll probably do a 10-minute tutorial of the deadlift, and in weeks 1, weeks 2, weeks 3, I'm going around to every athlete individually while they're performing them, making sure they have nearly perfect technique. After that, we're going to have a special emphasis on the conventional deadlift for about 1 to upwards of 3 months. Early on, yes, we might have a little bit of a basic hypertrophy phase. We're performing, I don't know, 6 repetitions, give or take. And gradually over time, we are going to have more an emphasis on strength to help develop the biceps femoris, to help develop the erector spinae. Specifically, the biceps femoris, both hypertrophy and strength, we want to mitigate the chance of injury. At the end of these blocks, for some athletes, depending on where we are, we will do 1 and 3 rep maxes, assuming their technique is very good. Now, as we get in season, especially mid to late season, we will definitely switch to the trap bar deadlift. So like I said, the trap bar deadlift is not completely useless. In my opinion, there's an increased emphasis on sports specificity. There needs to be an increased emphasis on sports specificity. And if you think about that last slide with regards to kinetic variables, right, the trap bar deadlift for sports specificity is probably better, right? And why is that? Because A, joint angles of the trap bar deadlift are probably more similar to that of the downstart and sprinting. And then B, as you saw on the last slide, is the force velocity curve, right? We want to be able to extend at those joints at a really high velocity similar to that of sprinting. So that's kind of how we periodize the use of the trap bar and the conventional deadlift throughout the duration of a sprint season.